How is everybody tonight? A little louder, please. All right, good. Clicker question. Got your clickers? Question tonight is it hot enough for you? A is yes, B is no, C is what a lame clicker question. A, B, or C, okay? A, yes, B, no, C, lame question. Now, we have to talk about attendance for a couple minutes. We're having some problems with it. Apparently, there's a lot of, well, do your clicker thing first, then I'll fill you in. Allie, let me know what you're getting. Yeah, I am curious about this one. 65% said yes. 24 think it's a really lame question. And 10% don't think it's hot enough. You guys can probably all get jobs on Bob Cannard's farm in Petaluma, where it is hot enough. So attendance, there's apparently some radio interference on some of the frequencies we use, so some of your clicks proving you're here are not getting registered. So we have to have a little backup system. And here's how it's going to work. Allie will post the attendance iClicker scores on BSpace the morning after the lecture, okay, Wednesday morning, so go check. And if your score is not reflective of your attendance, i.e. it doesn't say you got 1 point for that night's attendance and you did attend, you can email Allie with 3 things you learned from the session by midnight on Thursday, okay? You'll be marked as present if your email is reflective of the actual lecture. You only need to email Allie if your clicker grade on BSpace is not correct. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Good, sorry to put you to this trouble. But it's a lot of people, I guess, using this frequency, and so it's giving us some trouble. Couple other bits of housekeeping before I introduce our guest. The next Google Hangout session is going to be with the Kitchen Sisters, and that's going to be on the 18th of October at 2 p.m. Okay, 18th of October on 2 p.m. It'll be posted on BSpace too if you want to participate. Now, I gather from the people who came to see me at office hours today and other people I ran into during the week that last week's session with the Kitchen Sisters and the presentation by Jonathan Harris at Cowbird was kind of inspiring to some of you and has encouraged you to think outside the academic box on your projects, which I think is great. And anyone who's come to talk to me knows I've been pretty free about the kinds of things you can do. So you don't have to think about this as a conventional paper. And if you have a story you want to tell, great. The new Cowbird site just launched today or yesterday. You might take a look at it. We will post instructions to people who want to write Cowbird stories. Again, it's optional in the next week or two. Letitia's working on that. Tomorrow's discussion session with Nikki Henderson, we'll have a guest. Barbara Finnan from City Slicker Farm will be with Nikki tomorrow, and she's here tonight also. And that's at 6 p.m. in Barrows, 166. Next week, we're going to be learning about bees, honeybees, with Claire Kremen of the Berkeley faculty, and taking a look at things like colony collapse disorder and what that story has to tell us about the state of agriculture in America. Now, there is one genre of food stories that I personally am kind of obsessed with. And these are the stories that happen on farms. Most of the stories that we tell are about human subjects. But the kinds of stories you run into on farms have that dimension, but they're also stories about other species, all sorts of other species, plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and inanimate things too. Or allegedly inanimate things, because I think Bob might disagree with me on some of that. And you'll recall our first session, I told a story about being on Joel Salatin's farm and learning what was going on underground as those cattle were grazing those grasses, and that amazing story of how the roots of the grasses are basically killed off by the plant and digested by the soil bacteria and the nematodes and the earthworms to create new soil, new fertility, new biodiversity. That's the kind of story, often very inspiring, that's going on a handful of sustainable farms that are really rewriting stories not just about agriculture, but about the whole human relationship to nature. And that kind of experimentation is going on, I think, more on farms than just about anywhere in the culture right now. And one farm in particular we're going to learn about today, and some of the most interesting answers, I think, to those questions about the proper human relationship to the natural world and new models for that relationship, we're going to be learning about today. Bob Cannard, our guest speaker, is one of America's truly visionary farmers. A few years ago, I took a class on a visit to his farm. It was a group of 12, and I found it mind-blowing, and all the dozen other minds with me felt the same way, I think. And I've always wanted to go back, and I have to tell you, my dream for this class initially was that we would all go up to Petaluma. But when we looked into the buses and the footprint of 700 people, we realized we had to do something different, which was to bring Bob's farm and Bob to our class, which is what we've done. Bob has been farming sustainably. I don't think he would use the word organically for reasons we'll talk about. For 30 years on his main farm is 170 acres in Petaluma. His methods are radically unconventional, and each of them reflects not only an agronomic practice, but a whole philosophy of nature. Some of those ideas may strike you as implausible, even outrageous. But I would argue the proof is in the produce. And the produce that he grows is just some of the tastiest food I've ever had the privilege of eating. Greenstring Farm, the name of his farm, grows some amazing, wide variety of crops he'll tell you about. Much of the produce ends up at restaurants like Chez Panisse, and Chez Panisse and Bob Cannard have had a relationship going back 30 years? Long time. And it's also sold at the Greenstring Farm Store in Petaluma. I think you're prepared for a treat. One of the great privileges of this class is being able to bring people who are my personal heroes to meet you. And Bob Cannard is certainly one of them. Bob Cannard.
I can't really see all of you very well. Making sure you're alert, awake. Ask me a question. Come on, you've been in this class for quite some time. Ask a question. All at once. Ask a question. Let me hear your voice. All right, I guess you're awake. We've got to grow complete food. Nutritionally sound food is absolutely critical. And not only for ourselves, but for the plant itself. When you are able to grow nutritionally complete plants, they form and function all of their metabolic systems to completeness. And one of those metabolic systems, wide range of different characteristics, is their immunological system. Everything's got immunological systems, and plants are no exception. You can have a patch of broccoli that's being devoured by gophers, let's say, or having cabbage looper worms in its broccoli bud. And you can feed that broccoli plant wide range of different materials. But let's just pick on typical broccoli likes a lot of calcium. So we give it a little bit of calcium, 50 pounds to the acre of crushed oyster shell. And the gophers stop eating it. That plant takes in that calcium and changes the flavors of its root system, and the gophers stop eating it. The point is that we don't have to have an adversarial relationship, as we're trained, with the structure of nature. Very important you go out there and try to kill those organisms that are labeled as pests, and you might succeed in suppressing their population growth for a few days or moments. However, they're going to rebound, and you're still going to have the problem, and you're still going to have a weak, sick plant. And generally speaking, we don't go down the street and see a nice ribeye steak that's fallen off the butcher's truck a few days earlier and is loaded with maggots. We don't pick it up and wash it off and feed it to our child. It's just something we recognize we don't do. But we do go out into the garden, and we have aphids on our broccoli plants, and we spray some poisons on it, and we're supposed to take it home to the kitchen and wash it off and feed it to our child. I used to go to the farmers markets for 11 years, did that, and people would come in, moms would come in with their kids, and I had a table full of broccoli. My kids won't eat broccoli. And so the mother hen would be down the line a little bit, and I'd start peeling off little slivers of broccoli and giving it to the kids as they walked by. Not uncommon that the mother would be back in 15 minutes. My kids are eating broccoli. Well, that flavor comes from freedom of internalized hungers, from physical completeness of the plant. And it then can generate more than it's just regular sugars. It generates etheric sweetness, the sweetness of having total lack of internalized hunger to the plant. It forms and functions all its metabolic systems to completeness, and subsequently it is a happy critter with etheric sweetness. You ever get a tomato or some garden product and suck a little juice out of it and feel its energy flowing in your veins right away? That's not just plain simple sugars. Those are very complex sugars that are only formed under the completeness of broad spectrum nutrition and field ripeness. In order to achieve this, nature is really very simple. We have 4 primary food groups that everything living is comprised of. And maybe there's a third one. That's a little mysterious. The 4 primary ones, first off, is nothing lives alone. We live in connection with all that preceded us and all that we are in contact with. Our digestion is on the inside. The plant's digestion is in the soil. When you have bad digestion, then you are sick, and I assume these empty chairs are because people are sick. The digestive force is critical, a broad spectrum of microbiology to semi-macro microbiology that lives within the structure of the soil in a very intricate and basically unknown relationship. Millions of different forms and types of bacteria, yeasts and molds, and all of these things in terms have really only very recently been studied, the last 20 or 25 years. Previous to this period of time, the study of the soil biology as the digestive force, basically non-existent. Recently, there have been researchers that have attempted to understand soil biology. I call it the digestive force because that's what they do. Those plants, that's one of the 4 primary food groups. Got to have good digestion. You want balanced digestion. You want steady state digestion. You want digestion that grows. There is more biology in a living, good, healthy soil than there is mineral matter. And it's all part of it. The plant itself is a carnivore. Plants manufacture sugars, and they use some of their sugars to sweeten their fruits for seed dispersal. They use some of their fruits, sugars, to function their whole system. They pump a third to a half of all of the sugars that they generate into the soil. They feed soil biology with their manufactured sugars, just as we feed and raise chickens. That bacteria, there's always a tide in the soil, the moisture flowing to the plant as it volatilizes moisture into the atmosphere. That bacteria is swimming against the tide. However, as it gets old, it goes with the tide. And when it goes with the tide, it ruptures against the root cell wall, and its protoplasm, mineral-rich protoplasm, is disgorged, and the plant uptakes it. That digestive force does a lot of things, and that bringing the minerals, number 2 of our 4 primary food groups, are rocks. You take a volcanic rock, it contains everything on the planet. It's raw parent material. Everything is in there. And if that rock has cooled slowly, it was in magmatic condition, and it's volatilized into the atmosphere, and it cools slowly like volcanic ash or cinder or lava, then all of the atomic structure is all mixed up. It's highly available. And like a couple years ago, we had a little volcanic ash eruption out of Iceland, and it coated northern Europe with volcanic ash. Total remineralization, one of the best things that could occur. And only thing we heard about was it disrupted air traffic a little bit, or quite a little bit. Not one word about this beautiful new benefit of volcanic ash deposits on the soil, remineralizing them. Those biologies, they exchange their organic acids for the alkalis of the rock. They rot the rock and draw the minerals out of the rock and into their protoplasm and into the plant in full spectrum. And we say that we know what plants need to eat. And so we test the plant and so on and so forth. What utter absurd arrogance from my position to know, do we know what we need ourselves for the most part? In many ways, not. How are we supposed to know what an organism of a different order of life desires? And that we're going to lump them all together and test one and say that everybody has to have the same thing? More arrogance. You know, we don't have any essential recommendations on something like gold, but carrots accumulate gold in their foliage, a few parts per million. Other plants don't. Science dismisses, oh, it's osmotic pollution. Well, how come the grass growing next to the carrot plant doesn't do the same thing if it's pure osmotic transmission? No, the walnut tree accumulates mercury, and that's certainly not on the list of good food stuff for anybody. Well, walnut trees, they need mercury. You try to grow a walnut tree without mercury, and it ain't a walnut tree, it has white wood. And it's a sickly little beast. So it's really important. You guys are here of choice, I assume. And you have been blessed to have basically lived a life of choice. And we have to feed our plants so that they have a life of choice and can achieve their own completeness, their own contentment, so that they can package up their etheric sweetness. Those plants precede us, and they're responsible for us. They build us. Number 3 raw food parent group is air. Very important. We have soluble air, 2 gases that have come together that form the electrolyte we call water. Very important. We have hydrogen, all energy transfers, bonds, all hydrogen bonds. Wonderful stuff. We have nitrogen. That is a fixative that allows everything to transpire in there. And then we have old air. We have previously fixed air, like this oak that I'm standing on. This is almost all carbonaceous material, the most important of all the elements if we had to pick one. And it forms the structure of everything that we're working with. And that carbonaceous structure of this oak floor or your pencil is held together by number 4, which is energy. Sunlight energy, I like to label it as cosmic energy. We just passed through a harvest full moon, absolutely outstanding, different quality of light. And the next morning I woke up, got out of my log cabin and went and looked into the sky, and here was a double inverted rainbow around the declining full moon. Absolutely gorgeous. You don't see that with sunlight. It's different wavelengths. Plants and organisms have grown up on this planet under all of these influences to completeness, and they find their own completeness out of the whole package. You go into the garden with non-adversity. You feed everything to everybody. You allow everybody to have everything that they possibly could desire. And if somebody wants something and somebody doesn't want something and somebody wants more of something and somebody wants less of something, they've got it. You've got happy, healthy, strong, flavorful, nutritionally sound plants. Something that is basically non-existent in our commercial food divisions. So, the number 5 element is the mystery of where the seed all comes from. I can't get into that one. And you put that seed into that pool of physical available completeness, and that seed is going to grow itself layer by layer until it achieves its capacity for growth under the environmental circumstances that it's in. You can have a dandelion in a sidewalk crack, and it will produce one new dandelion seed and reproduce itself to get away from that sidewalk crack. You can plant that same dandelion seed. It can fall into one of my gardens downtown Sonoma, and a dandelion clump grows this big in diameter, and the leaves stand this tall, and it has hundreds of flowers, flush after flush of blossoms. And those mineral-rich, semi-bitter greens aid your digestion. Got to have the life of choice. How do you know whether it's working or not? Well, you pay attention to the plant. You know, you use your common senses. Does anybody ever go to a nursery and buy a plant in a pot and pull it out and see where the roots are? More often than not, circling around the bottom of the pot. Those are seeking roots. Those seeking roots are indicators that the plant knows that the soil that it went through is not going to provide that which it needs to achieve its reproductive completeness. And so it has seeking roots. It's like the tiger in the cage trying to get out, around and around. The tiger doesn't look in the middle of the cage. It knows there's no hole there. It's in the bars that there's some hope for escape. And that seeking root will, as soon as it finds nutritional soundness, will turn into a kind of root system that's very fibrous, very divided, many, many, many small branchy roots that are feeding root systems. Those are manifestation of contentment. You can grab hold of that rooted plant, and maybe it's a weed. Have anybody tried to pull a weed and had it be a big struggle? Well, and maybe you have to get the shovel out. Well, that is anchorage. You look at the plant, you pull on it, you feel its anchorage to the soil. One that is healthy and wants to grow there and his needs are being met from the earthly perspective is not gonna give up the ghost real easy. But one that is poorly grown it's gonna fold. Anybody ever go to the nursery and buy a little transplant and put it out in the garden and the next morning it's been eaten by something? Well, it's a hothouse plant grown with commercial fertilizers that imbalances it. So back to the 4 primary food groups for a moment. You give that nitrogen that everybody talks about. Oh, you want a big plant, feed it nitrogen. You know, hundreds of pounds to the acre for normal commercial crops, so much that the water table becomes poisoned under many, many conditions from high leachates of nitrates. And you go into that grow a high nitrogen plant. why it accumulates nitrogen, and nitrogen is poisonous to the plant in excess, so it has to suck up extra water. And so then you get a fat-bodied plant. That commercial nitrogen, excess nitrogen, also ammonia, uses as sterilant. It sterilizes the soil and gives the plant bad digestion, so that even if the minerals are present in the soil, the plant can't go through its natural process of having the biology digest the rock and bring it into solution and give it to the plant so it can make more sugars and become more. It is a static system. So you have a fat, mineral hollow plant, and what's going to happen? The bugs are going to come and put that weak sucker out of its misery and kill it, eat it up, and subsequently something that can grow healthfully in that little bit of soil will. Very resilient plants. All they need is what they need to do. Go into the store, look at leaf tear strength. Put your fingertips together and grab the leaf between your finger and thumb and bend upward. You can put thousands of pounds of tension on that leaf, and you can test the tear strength of the leaf. You possibly go in and look at a high nitrogen commercially grown lettuce plant. You touch it and it gets bruised, and it has no tear strength. You use all your common senses, your strengths, you feel it, you measure it. When it does tear, you listen to the snap of it. You taste it. You taste its effect on your digestion. You taste its effect upon the consciousness of your dreams. You use absolutely everything you have, and as well as looking at the whole plant, for God's sake. You know, a plant's supposed to not have too many bugs on it. Bugs are really essential in the garden world, in the whole world. They are degraders of used body parts. You know, like maybe a zucchini bush right now going towards the end of the season is going to get some powdery mildew on it, and maybe it has cucumber beetles on it, little Diabrotica cucumber beetles. That the blossom of the zucchini is attractant yellow, and it closes at night and opens in the morning. In a healthy zucchini plant, the Diabroticas overnight sleep inside the blossom. A healthy one, they never defecate in the blossom. They never eat on the blossom. They come out in the morning and they go down and eat up the old leaves and clean up the mother zucchini plant and poop it out, and then it rains or irrigates on it. And we now have Diabrotica zucchini leaf manure tea leaching in and assisting the process of digestion further and renewing the energy and bringing it back up into the mother zucchini plant as it has its outreach towards its reproductivity. Of course, I'm coming along and picking it off all the time. So, no, healthful characteristics of the plant, everybody has them. The apple is waxy, so waxy that the codling moth worm can't bite through the wax. The broccoli leaf has waxy bloom on it, and so much so that water droplets sit on it and retain that moisture, and they have a fragrance to it. You go into a commercial broccoli field. I used to do consultation on these issues, and there's a big chunk of commercial broccoli, but it's going to be marketed as organic. It's organic commercial. Okay, you go into that field, it smells like boiled cabbages. I grew up in PA, and those old grandmas back there thought that the cabbage was inedible unless it was cooked all day long. And the whole house smelled like boiled cabbage. And that's how the broccoli field smells. You go into a nice, well-grown broccoli field, it is light and clear. It isn't like a flower smell. It's like a broccoli smell. It purifies and enlivens the air. And there's just no comparison, absolutely no comparison. You pick broccoli, well-grown broccoli, for a few hours, and your fingers are blackened with the wax that comes off of their stems and leaves. No, I have yet to see a single textbook on plant health characteristics to look at the plant in its symmetry, its posture, its color, its texture, a compendium that would indicate to us that should be undergraduate requirement at every land-grant college, that teaches us how to look at the plant to know what the healthiness of the plant is. I've never found such a text. I'd love to. I'd write it myself, except I'm marginally literate. It's totally true. I might be able to speak, but I can't write worth a damn. So, you know, how do we get this real food? Well, we feed it raw crushed rocks, raw crushed igneous rocks. We stimulate the soil biology by going into the mountains. This park right up here behind the hill, and take yourself a little sandwich in your back pocket and eat it, and fill that tiny little sandwich bag with little pickings of compost from many different sources, underneath rotted logs, under moss, every different kind of tree, just a teaspoon from every place. You bring that home, and that is an indigenous inoculum that has been killed in the soils of the urban center. And you mix that into your generating compost, and subsequently it proliferates. And you can spread that compost directly on your garden ground, and you will inoculate. And you have to do it and do it again, because you don't go from floor to high level of life soil all in one jump. It's a progressive feeding. You grow, you're here, your level of life support's here. You can grow a frost and build on it slowly. So you continuously inoculate. We on our farms inoculate every time we irrigate, whether we need to or not. The raw crushed rock is subsequently readily available and acidulated or digested by the organisms of the soil. Go out into the rocky wilderness someplace and find a rock that has been part of nature, and you pick it up and get your knife out, and you can scrape the outside of it off. All the good soft elements have been taken away. The only thing left are clay platelets, silicaceous clay platelets. That's why you go to some place like the Amazon and the soil is all reduced to clay. There's no rocks left. They've all been dissolved by the powerful life forces of the high energy tropical rainforest. And so all nutrients are held in the life and the clay substrate. And no more rocks, all dissolved, all eaten up. We don't have to worry too much about the sunlight energy, but we need old air in the soil. We lots of times talk about growing cover crops in organic circumstances. We talk about growing green manure cover crops. Well, a green manure cover crop is one when the plant has sprouted up and is just ready to bloom. At its first bloom, then you're supposed to cultivate it into the soil, and it's supposed to give you a nitrogen boost. Well, it will, and all that nitrogen will turn to ammonia and help sterilize the soil, and then ammonia will gasify if a crust forms in the right circumstances, and it'll all volatilize back into the atmosphere. Bad news. Nobody go out into nature, just observe normal nature. You go out into normal nature, and what do you see? You see all of our hills turn brown in the fall, in late summer, where they're annual grass, they're disturbed, but nonetheless, they turn brown, they die of their own volition. They grow as long as they can possibly grow. They translocate all of their mineral nutrition, all of the good stuff to their seed babies, and they die of contentment. So you incorporate two things, contentment into your garden soils and durable organic matter. Food for the soil biology so that it can eat it and run its energetic metabolism off of it so that it can piss on the rocks and rot the rocks and bring the minerals into balance, and it all works in concert. It's very simple. The mature, durable cover crop, absolutely essential. We additionally want to not dominate the nature structure. So in many gardens, not little small urban gardens, there you have to supply that carbon that would come from the durable carbonaceous application of your mature cover crop. You have to supply that through recycling material known as recycled compost. However, in a more spacious farm garden circumstance, my operations, I grow 50% of the ground for people and 50% of the ground for nature at all times. And in this climate, I don't get 100% theoretical gross yield. I'm happy with a 75% theoretical gross human yield, and at the same time, I get a 75% nature yield. And 2 75s is 150, and I get to do that twice during the course of the year. And so we have 300% theoretical gross yield, 50% of that for people and 50% of that for nature. And in any activity, there are inefficiencies. And so you've got to have more than 100% if you're going to be what the word is called sustainable. Sustainable, from my book, has to represent, it has to grow. That's why I'm here, to try to influence you guys to grow your consciousness associated with nature. If it doesn't grow, then the rest of the world's moving ahead and you're stagnated and falling behind. So how do we do this? Well, you can grow some yourself. You can't feed yourself entirely, but people have pets. You've grown up with pets. Lots of us have. How much time do you spend with the dog or a cat or the guinea pig or the snake or whatever it is? All as you need for the garden to feed a little household is 15 minutes a day. 15 minutes and hand tools. It's all you need. Very, very simple. If you can apply one person out of the household to spend 15 minutes a day, you can't grow everything. You probably don't have enough space in an urban area to grow everything, but there's lots of little bits of land out there, and that's really all it takes. It's quite remarkable, the generosity of the vegetable kingdom. Of all of the land that we use for agriculture, on an average, we use somewhere around 2%, 2.5% for growing vegetables. When you grow a crop of carrots, not uncommon to get 20,000 pounds of carrots to the acre. Let's say we grew 1 acre of carrots, and we had 20,000 pounds, and we're going to have a big carrot party, and everybody's going to get a half a pound of carrots cooked in every possible way that all of the imaginations of the wonderful cooks can generate. And we can have a 40,000 person party with 1 acre of carrots. Vegetables have, the wild carrot has given up its independence, its wildness. Wild carrot is really a medicinal toxin. You have to be very careful administering wild carrot extracts. They're poisonous, but they're useful, but they're poisonous. The carrot has given up that wildness in order to embrace a relationship with humanity, and it's taken thousands of generational selections to select the carrot that we have and take granted as a marketplace carrot today. And that is a regular, common, old-fashioned genetic carrot, not just regular Danvers carrot or a Nantes carrot, things that have been around for a long time. That's all you need. Common, old-fashioned genetics, just like all of us are common genetics. All of this fancy, hybridized, genetically modified, it's all for big business. It's not for your little garden. When you're going to grow your little garden, you'll have a budget. Let's say it's $100. I want you to use 90% on environmental inputs, on influences, on compost to bring carbonaceous food structure to the plants that you're attempting to grow. I want you to spend only 10% of your whole garden budget on genetic procurement, or buying your seeds. If you see a big fancy color picture catalog for selling seeds, you probably don't want to buy any from that. If you see seeds that are hundreds of dollars to the pound, you can't afford that. Those are selected for uniform harvest for industrial agriculture. You want the common carrot or the common broccoli that some ripen now and some ripen then and some ripen months later. And when you plant enough of them out, you'll still see 1 out of about 1 million will still have retained its wildness. It'll go right to seed. The hell with you. I don't trust you as humanity. Goes right to seed. No, it's really very easily accomplished, and we make far too big of a complex issue out of it. The foundation food groups of nature, it's all you need. 4 things you got to remember: digestion, rock, air, and cosmic sunlight. And you give it all to it, and it's going to work. It's going to work, and you're going to have your best foods if they're locally produced and genetically locally adapted. You know, one of the only ways that humanity is ever going to become sustainable is if we quit this silly business of turning food into commodities and letting a few powerful entities handle it all and ship it all around and pervert its genetics and try to stuff it down our throats. We need to be independent within our location and grow varieties of selections that are adapted to that region and are fixed and consumed in that region. And you develop a kind of a more civilized social characteristic, like I want a civilization of the microflora in the soil. I would love to live in a human climate where we practiced a greater degree of civility. There are limiting factors. The tools that we use today to cultivate the earth, to plant our crops, are the same tools that we had thousands of years ago. The stick with the rock on the end of it, except now we've refined the rock and we've turned it into a little metal hoe and things like this. And that's on the old-fashioned side. We used to live in a different economy. We used to have a big planet and a small population. And we developed these agricultural practices, all for people and nothing for nature. So we claim our space and push nature all the way out and pull all the weeds, kill everything, push it all out. And we would grow our food crops in there. And for the first years, it would grow bountifully because the soil was fertile and virgin conditions. And however, when it's all for people and nothing for nature, over the course of time, the soil becomes completed and the nature side declines and the digestive forces decline, the plants get sick. Was no big deal. So we abandon that little plot and get a new plot and take a new plot out from nature, and over the course of 100 or more years, the little plot will heal itself and things are all right. Well, now we have a different economy. We live in a different economy. We have a big planet, a small planet, and a big population. And subsequently, we still have the same agricultural mindset, all for people and nothing for nature. Do you know, I live up in Sonoma County, less than 100 miles from here, and up in the Sebastopol region, we used to have what was known as a temperate rainforest. More than 100 inches of rain fall in a year and in every month of the year. And subsequently, we started harvesting redwood trees and building San Francisco and burning it down every 6 or 8 years or something like that. And people made a fortune of it. And as the land opened up, the soil was rich and fertile and filled with organic litter, hundreds of years worth of accumulated benefits. And that region became the #1 in the nation producer of raspberries. That lasted about 20 years until too many of the trees were cut down and the summer rains stopped and the winter rains became inclement and hard. And up on one region up there, Gold Ridge, they lost 18 inches of topsoil in one night. And so no more raspberries, and so they switched over to growing apple trees up there, and that was very successful. 1 ton of beautiful 2-pound apples to the tree, and just gorgeous, bug-free, trouble-free fruit, just huge growths. And that lasted until 1972, where the land-grant colleges here in California decreed that we had apple decline syndrome. Well, that apple decline syndrome is a fact that we've exhausted the soil from clean cultivation and no food for nature, soil collapsing, biology collapsing, mineral nutrition becoming unavailable. Apple tree gets syndrome, decline syndrome. So many problems, they're not individually identifiable. And so we now switched over to growing grapevines up there. 100 years ago, you couldn't grow Pinot Noir or Chardonnay grapevines up in the Sebastopol region because it was too cool and too moist, except up on some isolated high ridges. And so we're right here in our own backyard proceeding to make a desert, sandy soils up there, and it won't take much longer. Someday soon, maybe in your grandchildren's time, unless we correct our measures and develop agricultural systems that it supports nature as it supports us, it's going to be a desert again. And so, you know, if humanity is truly the most intelligent organism here on planet Earth, that's what they claim, you know, that's what we all are led to believe, then, in my mind, the soils that are under human culture should be richer and broader spectrum in diversity and freer of disease and disorder than wild, unmanaged nature. And it's clearly not the case. I grew up in this agricultural industry, nursery industry, always pouring poisons, killing bugs. Oh, screw that noise. You use bugs as indicators of your plant health. And if you have too many bugs, you know you have a sick plant. And I have no interest in feeding anybody a sick plant because it's not going to make them happy and healthy and clearer minded. It's my job as a farmer or as a producer of food stocks to produce stuff that's going to brighten the population. In a breeding program, you want to breed a kind of dog with a longer tail or something. In a breeding program, it takes approximately, from a million organism, approximately 3 generations to have an influence upon that organism. It's my thought that if we were to possibly learn how to grow our food so it grew of choice, so it achieved its own physical completeness and shared that physical completeness with us, that in 3 generations of us feeding that kind of food to our children's children, that perhaps humanity would maybe reach out and become the organism it has the potential to be, instead of reacting from all of sort of cellular internal hungers and being greedy and self-serving and selfish and all of this stuff that transpires. It's absolutely ridiculous. So what are you going to do? Try to grow good food, for God's sake. Try to grow some of it, a little bit of it, even just a little bit of it for yourself. Well, back to tools, you know, the tooling of today is big tractors and expensive high-energy equipment and all sorts of stuff like that, all designed for big. And here we could possibly design stuff for little, stuff that took a bunch of the little repetitive, mind-dulling, repetitive tasks away from the local agricultural producer. We need small, low-energy tools for preparing little areas of the soil. You know, we go out there with our big equipment, and we cultivate up all of the land, and then we plant seeds in about 5% of it. So we really only need to cultivate 5% of it. That means that instead of having a 100-horsepower tractor, perhaps with the right tooling, we could have a 5-horsepower tractor. We go out there and we cultivate up all the land between our crops to kill all the weeds. Well, that means all for people and nothing for nature, and that's not sustainable. So we need to learn how to grow intercrops between those corn plants or whatever it is. Doesn't make any difference, all the same. And you have a row of potatoes and a row of weeds, and weeds grow up and they become competitive. It's much less energy to suppress the weed than try to kill it. So you mow it off a little bit. 5% of the energy required, 95% savings. No, we have some opportunity for utilization of our mechanical and technical base to actually get with it and form a type of agriculture that's fitting to the economy that we find ourselves living in today. Otherwise, it's very likely that we'll find ourselves living in the old-fashioned economy where we have very few people and a lot of big planet again. The land needs people, and the people need land. There are a lot of people in the urban center that aren't really well equipped to live in the urban center, that could live very nicely in a more rural-ish kind of even woods setting, taking care of the national treasures of our wildlands. We clear-cut the forest and then let it regrow back like a bunch of weeds and claim that it's a wilderness. Well, it has so much internalized competition. You damage something, you've got the responsibility to get it back into a healthy level of environment. We go out, and over the last 15 years or so, we've spent trillions of dollars of international monies trying to have some influence upon the peoples of, they call it the Middle Eastern region. And pretty much to no avail. You know, we can all get into a fight, and you might knock some sense into my thick noggin, but I'll probably be a little wary of you thereafter. We could go out and try to nurture and cultivate ourselves, and we can actually share ideas and grow and become a little bit more, perhaps. Well, instead of having spent that trillions of dollars trying to have this social influence, if that's what you want to call it, I mean, it's ridiculous, but that same amount of capital, that same amount of supposedly scarce petroleum and energy could have been used to cure the degraded lands of the region, the Sahara and the emerald triangles of the Tigris-Euphrates rivers used to be luxuriant places, and because of all for people and little or nothing for nature, they've been degraded to near desert-like conditions. That same amount of money could have very well, in this about 15-year period of time, those areas could be well on their way to becoming meadowlands. And if you're worried about man-generated influences upon the climate, what more could you do to cool it down than turn a hot spot, man-made hot spots like the Gobi and all the other major deserts on the northern hemisphere into cool spots? Very easy. What's the desert missing? Well, losing its minerals. You go to Rome in the middle of August, September, and the big winds blow off of the Sahara and carry the high, soft element dust, leaving the silica behind, and your car is going to be all dirty in the morning because this dust is precipitated with the dew. Well, that's why Italy and southern France continue to be able to grow stuff under their all-for-people and nothing-for-nature approach because they get remineralized at the expense of another piece of land. And that continued expansion of the, near-continued expansion of the desert grounds is ridiculous. We're not talking about anything that requires anything but observation. You know, the rocks start big up in the high mountains, and by the time they tumble down the creeks and go to the rivers and get to the ocean beach, the only thing that's left is the silica or the sand. About 25% of our earth is silica. And all of the other softer elements have been put into solution or suspension of the running water, and they're supposed to be flooded out on the floodplain, carrying new, naturally ground up mineral tea to the floodplains on an annual flood annual basis. That same river or creeks has soil erosion from it, and all the biology, the dead deer, everything of the mountain ends up in the creeks. It gets ground up, the big blender, and it carries the biology. So you get a re-inoculation, just like making a compost tea, and it gets a re-mineralization, just like taking rocks and putting them in your rock crusher and grinding them up to a fine powder so they have surface availability. It's that desert, it needs broad-spectrum minerals, it needs soil biology, it needs plants to start pumping sugar into it. There are many deserts are not free of life. There are thousands of adaptive edge-of-the-desert plants. They just need to be stimulated. And at the same time, this can be all done, mostly done, muchly done, whatever you want to do with human labor instead of high-energy aircraft and stuff like that. And one of the biggest problems of peoples in the region is lack of opportunity for human self-expression, which is a job, work, contribution. And so we could use lots of that support money to employ lots of people to actually make the place better instead of getting in fight. Well, I don't know. It's kind of a crazy idea, I suppose. I'll give you another crazy idea. There are, they say, 7 billion of us living on this planet at this time. I want you all to live to 100 years, healthy to the last moment, longer if you can, but on an average, let's say 100 years. When you finally do expire, there's 7 billion, 1% of our 7 billion is what? 700 million. If what we do with our carcasses at this point is we incinerate them. You realize that it takes enough natural gas to cremate a normal human body size to heat and cool a typical coastal California house for the whole year. The pipe going into the crematorium is bigger than the pipe going into a 200-unit hotel building, gas pipe. Huge amount. And we say that cremation is a environmentally sound approach. Hardly. No, composting is the only way. Instead of getting an urn, you get grandma in a compost barrel, and that barrel is enough to influence 1 acre of land very admirably. 700 million acres a year. If we're going to succeed and survive as an organism, we need to modify many of our behaviors, and our consciousness is associated. 700 million acres is a pretty good sized chunk. And you can have a very positive influence with that biological substrate that holds and supports and encourages the digestive forces of the soil that crescend down and digest the mineral substrates and support the life of a plant. And 1 unit of carbon in a soil holds 8 units of water. And so we have 1 barrel of 100 pounds, 200 pounds of compost. It's holding 1,000 or more gallons of water in that 1 acre, and no more desert. No, there's many things that we could very easily execute. Another thing I'd like to see, and one of my students is practicing it on a rooftop right here. One of the gals brought me this nice little mint tea. She came to my Green String Farm Institute and stayed there for 90 days probably, and learned how to grow plants in natural process farming techniques. And one of the things I'm always trying to encourage my urban brethren to do is start little urban tea gardens. You know, on a little lot, you can purify the soils very readily through digestive composting and proper inoculation. And you can grow perennial tea plants like mints and lemon verbena and sage and thyme and oregano, and they all have very positive influences upon our consciousness. And on a quarter-acre lot, you could easily grow 100,000 cups worth of tea on that quarter-acre lot in the urban center. And I'll bet that you could find enough people over the course of time that would forsake the Starbucks coffee store for you 1 day or 2 days a week to get a brightening cup of tea, something that actually attenuates your consciousness rather than just like a little shot with the needle. So you could make a living having positive influence upon and be an example. It's really hard to grow carrots in the urban center. You grow carrots, and carrots are very absorptive of everything, whether they're in the pot or whether in the garden. And you grow a carrot commercially, they grow carrots on soils that have accumulated too many poisons. And you grow the carrot crop so you can suck the poisons up, and then you can go back to growing lettuce or something else that you've toxified the system with. So you wouldn't, and you only get a few carrots, but 100,000 cups of tea for $1 each, for God's sake, you'd have the Star Company knocked off the block maybe. A little tea garden, a lovely application, and an opportunity to sell something else on the street except what you usually find being sold on the street. Now, what's the future of organics? I really believe the future of organic as certified, government-controlled organic is probably rather limited, but the future of organic culture is, I believe in like 20 years or something like that, you're going to see pretty much all foodstuffs are grown naturally, not with the USDA food stamp of organic on it, but naturally with a vast reduction in the use of toxins. Toxins are expensive. They don't do anything positive. We've got, there's a couple of 4 big carrot growers in this nation, and one of them I and my colleagues have worked with. They package carrots that perhaps you see on the market under a label, Bunny Love, many labels. They grow like 20,000 acres of carrots, about a quarter of the nation's carrots. Guess what they're doing? After 10 years of worth of research, all of their carrots are now being fed fine crushed volcanic rock to supply minerals. Why? Because they have less bug problems. Why? Because the carrots have better shelf life. Why? Because they reach static sweetness quicker, and they have longer storage, shelf storage. Additionally, you can no longer buy liability insurance for poisoning the water table or your neighbor, and if you eliminate the use of toxins, you reduce your exposure to such liabilities. The population is also demanding a cleaner foodstuff. Thank you for your generational advancement. The future, I believe, it's in your purses right now. It's what you do with it. Now, one more point, and then Michael says we're going to go to questions. And I'd like to see in this 20-year period of time us develop much more of a local regional food application system like we spoke of, and be able to regionally feed ourselves. Whether it's this country or any place in the world, that's the only way that it can really work. And if 10% of us, in 1900, 90% of us lived that way. We were in the country, and 10% of us lived in the urban center. Today, it's the other way around. If 10% of us today were to go into the semi-regional places where we all live and grow food for that region, provide nutrition, sound nutrition, freshness, physical completeness, then employment for our growing generations, opportunity for children to get exposed to all of the sensory, mind-expanding characteristics of growing up within the structure of nature. We'd have a little bit of a different culture, a little bit of a different mindset, and perhaps that segment of population and those that they fed through their efforts would coalesce and start a new political party. I call it the Garden Party, and we would subsequently invite leadership that perhaps would lead us towards healing deserts rather than initiating greater altercations. So with that, I'm open to anything that you might fire at me.
Got him barking.
Oh, good, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Thank
you.
Would you like some tea?
Yeah, I would actually.
We'll take this.
Thank you. Well, my head's spinning at the prospect of solving the problems of the Middle East by composting old people. But it made me think of other forms of human, human waste that we don't use either in the natural, right? And what are your feelings about that? And that was a very controversial issue: sewage sludge.
Sewage sludge, and see when you take an expired carcass and you thoroughly compost it, any residual disease, toxicity, or complaint, it's thoroughly digested. It's all eaten up. It's all renewed. It's totally cleaned up and transformed. Nothing. Let's say there was some TB in that body. There's none of that's left anymore. It's all been eaten by biology and transformed. The carcass is put through a grinder. It's inoculated. It's mixed with carbonaceous substructure, and you get grandma in a barrel, and you age her for 120 days. It's all totally new. The same holds true with daily biological wastes. We had years in the foundation of this country, we developed laws that you can't have outhouses. Well, in the old days, what they did is dug well on one side of the house and an outhouse hole on the other side of the house, and they were both 20 feet deep, and we put high nitrogenous waste material in one hole, and it goes anaerobic, and the antagonistic microbiology proliferates and infects the water table, gets over to the other hole, and the kids drink water, and they have a disorder and maybe die. So we have new laws about handling waste stream products and whatnot, and one of those laws for most I'm in Sonoma County, I can't answer for the rest of the state, but you can have compost toilets that mix the material with carbonaceous material and proper inoculation, and within a very short period of time, it's completely innocuous and will proliferate to excellent growth. It also is one of those elements that needs to be changed.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about organics. You know, you make a point that you're not certified organic and that you've got some problems with how conventional organic agriculture is practiced. You've also suggested that industrial agriculture may just fail of its own weight as toxins go away or are proved not practical. How does what you're doing differ from organic agriculture as it's practiced in the state?
Well, I grow 50% for nature. Hardly anybody does that. They weeds, you got to kill them. It's ridiculous, but you know, normal agriculture is basically mining the substrate we call soil, and as it gets killed off, the crops get less. You know, the first almond trees grown in the state were planted down in Kern County on the floodplain of the Kern River, and they were planted with a shovel. And now we went through shovel planting to all sorts of different processes of deep ripping and fumigation with methyl bromide, and digging big holes with backhoes and fumigating it with all sorts of mustard gases and so on and so forth. And today we have a very big almond industry in the state. It yields approximately $1 billion in gross income, and they're looking forward to more this year, but it's about a $1 billion a year crop, and it's about 250,000 acres, and most of those 250,000 acres are on new ground that haven't been planted to almonds before because they haven't built up the residual disorders that are associated with a fixed cropping system when it's all for people and nothing for nature. And so most of those almond acres they're turning over. The old ones are being abandoned and ripped out, and other kinds of crops grown there, and mostly forage crops, and the new ones are mostly in the Sacramento and west side of the San Joaquin. And so that's ongoing. The big agriculture isn't likely to go away. They're not going to give up. But vegetable agriculture and small-scale local agriculture, we could feed ourselves. You know, if you could get, I live there in Sonoma County, and we have about 500,000 people there, and if we could get everybody to spend $2 a day on locally grown products, we'd have $1 million in cash flow a day, which would support 10 per day, nice little family, local producing vegetable farms, grow other stuff too, I don't care. And that would mean that Sonoma County would have 36,500 little farms. Maybe there'd be more farms. Some would be bigger, some would be smaller, depends upon you and your land and all of those variables. But we'd have 36,500 new, small, locally owned businesses recycling currency within the community and trading little bits of currency for little bits of high quality, freshly prepared foods that aren't necessarily organically stamped, but are stamped with the sincerity, with the integrity of the relationship between the farmer, the soil, and the customer.
One of the things that Bob didn't visualize for you when he talks about 50% for nature, 50% for us, is what his farm looks like. It doesn't look like any farm you've ever seen. And I remember getting out of the car and like, where are the crops? And I saw weeds, and I saw, and maybe that's not the right word for what I saw, but I saw lots of plants that you couldn't eat, and you'd have to kind of, you know, dig around, and then you would see the broccoli plant amidst the weeds. And it doesn't, his farm doesn't offer the conventional aesthetic satisfactions of clean fields and rows, parallel rows of plants, but you realize that that represents, even though we find it very satisfying, an imposition on the land that you're suggesting is a problem.
It is. That's not quite true. It is all various weeds, and most of them are quite edible, and we just haven't learned how to use those. However, it is extremely satisfying in the marketplace. Like right now, I have a patch of about, there's about half an acre left because they've been picking them and using them up on me too fast, but I have a nice patch of leeks. And the leeks, you don't even know that there's leeks in that field. There is amaranthus in that field, which is a big weed, and it grows about this tall, and right now it's all loaded with its seed heads. Millions and millions of seeds, which is food storage for the earthworms and everything else, wonderful stuff. And all of its organic biomass is drying out. The amaranthus plants are dying of their own physical reproductive contentment. And the leeks are planted in rows about every 2 feet apart underneath those guys, and they have long shanks because they have to reach up for the sunlight. And the shanks are blanched, they're white. And when you pull a leek and you cut it, you take it to the kitchen, you open it up. Usually you take a leek that's grown in clean, cultivated soils, and all of its leaves are filled with splashed mud and dirt. These leeks, there's no exposed soil, so there's no exposed mud and dirt inside the leek. It's very satisfying.
Sounds like it. Let me take some of your questions for Bob. Who's got a question? Yes. Will you stand up so we can hear you? What are you growing?
Oh. Let's see. Beets and carrots and sunflower and a really old-fashioned traditional wheat. I've got about 50 acres of that. And we'll start olives for olive oil, about 50,000 trees. Apples and pears and figs and prunes and plums and avocados and mandarins and lemons and oranges and eggplants and peppers and tomatoes and zucchinis and winter squash and pumpkins and asparagus and artichokes and cardoons and I don't know, all of it. Hundreds of different crops. You don't fill the table with a commodity. It is a diversified home garden. It is a big diversified home garden. And my old home farm has one primary customer, a small restaurant here in this town, and they serve the stuff. You don't fill the table with one thing. You need creativity. You need diversity to your foodstuffs. All of the herbs, the oregano, the thyme, the sage, the lemon verbenas, the anise hyssops, the peaches, nectarines, apples, the greens, all the cabbages. I picked cabbages this morning. Cabbages and kale and collards and cauliflower and mustards and God, you name it, it's out there in its season.
Okay, yes?
So what would your ultimate farming tool do? If you have to have a tool, what would it do? And it could do anything, you know, Star Trek, you know. It could like take a picture of the ground and tell you all the way down to the parent material. Now what would this tool do?
This is Bob's ideal tool, if you didn't hear.
Interface. It's one tool. I've been working on those for years. It's one tool that is highly adaptive, that opens up the little kerf to be able to plant the seeds or the transplant. It has reciprocating cultivation that suppresses the competition right next to the plant as walking pace. Combination of solar electric drive and human power. All you have to do is walk, and walking is a very healthy thing for you. It will plant the seeds, and then it will suppress the competition between the rows. As the weeds get too big, you have to suppress them, so it'll cut them down. It'll do all of those things.
Yes. Question is, how did Bob get into this style of farming?
I grew up in the commercial nursery industry where we applied, I used to stick my head in barrels of DDT, 10% DDT powder. We'd get these cardboard barrels and have to scoop it up with the aluminum scoop and put it in a 1-pound paper bag and tamp it down and weigh it and fold up the top and staple the label on in the retail nursery industry and spread simazin and go into the production greenhouses and use things like Balaton and Banrod. If you get one drip in your eye, you're blinded. And spread commercial fertilizers around by the ton and crawl underneath houses with gallons of chlordane and malathion, concentrate, 80% stuff. I grew up with this stuff and in a rather puritanical background. And if I had any free time, I wandered off into the mountains, into the structure of nature, and developed a thesis that I wanted to know why nature would grow so nicely, and we needed all of these inputs here. I went to a land-grant college, dropped out right away because they weren't interested in inquiry. They just wanted to train me to become an operator within the existing structure, and moved off to study nature as growing food. And nature's your best teacher, that plant right before you. It doesn't have any deception, it doesn't have any lies, it's naked, it's not going to get up and run away. It is screaming out. Every physical characteristic tells you everything about its life, past and present, and it's extremely responsive. You can feed a plant in a way that I can tell within 5 minutes. You can tell within the next morning. You give the plant a little bit of compost tea or hard crushed rock or crushed oyster shell or something that it needs, and you water it in feed the baby right at the root, and come the next morning with your penknife and start digging the soil away from down by its root system, and more often than not, you'll see new little white roots springing up and absorbing the leachate of that nutrient substrate. And that is a plant response. It's telling you, thank you. Its posture will change, its color will change, it will brighten, it'll smell different, its leaf strength will increase.
Yes?
Yeah, well, I brought that across when I was talking about the desert. The desert needs attention. Desert was stomped to death by people, not by goats, but by people. And we've damaged that. Our organism in previous lifetimes have damaged this. And it's now our responsibility to fix it. We go and have clear-cut vast areas. Last summer, it was in Texas, I think, maybe someplace down there in the Southwest, hundreds of thousands of acres of mostly pine mixed, but mostly pine forest burned off. All that land is second and third growth land. People have come in, we in previous lifetimes have chopped all the trees down, harvested the logs, fattened ourselves with it, and abandoned trees are all gone, let that go, and it grows back. Where you cut a tree down, had one stem, it might grow back with 5 or 6 stems if it's an oak tree around here. And so it has internalized competition. Do you know what internalized competition does to you? You don't have any at the moment because you chose to come to this classroom. But there are many students who perhaps didn't come because they had internalized competition.
Can you stand up so we can hear you? It's really a feed the world question. How do you do it with a limited amount of good farmland in a system that requires giving half of it to nature?
Well, the Sahara used to be all good farmland. It used to be a tropical rainforest. We have plenty of land. Land is not a limiting factor, but it's a mixture of various things. When you have concentration, then it's all for people, and so that piece of land that's all for people has to be supported by other land, the materials from other land. You need the carbonaceous substrates in order to maintain the organic matter content in the soil. So you have small-scale stuff, great, waste stream material, but we don't handle it locally. We don't handle it properly. Like we have here in the Bay Area a organic materials handling concept that's developed very nicely, and the garbage truck comes around and picks up all of your organic waste stream from your kitchen, curbside, restaurants, all this stuff. That one little delivery truck goes and picks that up, takes it to a transfer yard, dumps it off, puts 80,000 pounds of it onto a bigger truck, sends it 3 hours to Sassoon to the compost yard, and there, millions of dollars worth of equipment, put it through an aerobic compost turning system very rapidly, and then I want a load of compost from Jepson Prairie Compost, where most of it goes to, out there, and it cost me $250 for 40 yards of compost and $450 for transportation. It's all petroleum. It's totally ridiculous waste of money. If we were going to do that and move it around, well, at the very least, it should go to some place on the wharf like Hunters Point. There's a big amount of land out at Hunters Point over on the other side of the bay, and it's a poisoned waste site, an old World War I and II shipyard kind of place. You can purify that ground by building compost on it, and we've got the waste stream material right there, and within a course of 5 or 10 years, Hunters Point could be a luxuriant food-producing piece of ground, high density, with imported foodstuffs from our waste stream material. But no, a balance between those two concepts, and we only use about 2 or 2.5% of all of our land for vegetable production. Vegetables are the most generous of all plants in terms of yield, nutritional substrate yield per hectare, whatever you want to work with.
So land's not the limiting factor, but what about labor?
That's why we need new tools. Well, it's got to take some of the drudgery of hoeing or crawling along and transplanting and doing these things. We need, right now, an acre is 208 feet by 208 feet. And I'm going to plant some carrots in that. And I'm going to put a row every 1 foot apart. So that means that if I have a row every 1 foot apart and an acre is 43,560 square feet, I have 43,560 linear feet that I've got to walk to plant that 1 acre, pushing this little cedar that was invented more than 150 years ago here in this country, a Planet Junior cedar. Perfectly satisfactory tool. However, 7.5-mile walk to plant each acre. I have 20 acres on home farm alone. You have to become an agricultural athlete. You have to wish to work. You don't go to the gymnasium. You are your gymnasium. And yes, better tooling so that not everybody can do that. No, you guys, some guys, you like to go backpacking up in the Sierras? Huh? Anybody? Yeah? So you go put a 30 or 40 pound pack on and maybe walk 30 or 40 miles. Well, I walk 30 or 40 miles right in the garden at every full moon, replanting the garden. Well, I don't do it anymore. My support team of women do that.
Yes. Could you
stand up and speak up? Green String Farm in greenstringfarm.com is open every day from 10 to 6 over on the Petaluma side.
No, you had a question. Samin.
Stand up so we can hear you.
Can you tell the story about soybeans and GMOs and the original soybean plant and how it's
Oh, okay. Well, the soybean, the natural soybean, is a very nutritious bean and traditional in other countries' cultures, and it requires a very rich soil to grow well. And in the late 50s, the soybean was genetically modified by taking, not by contemporary GMO techniques, but old-fashioned genetic modification. You take a barrel of soybeans and maybe you put some diesel fuel on them, and maybe you put some DDT or some other heavy organophosphates on it, or maybe you stick it in the nuclear reactor and you nuke it. Anything you can do to it, and then you plant them out, and something's going to grow. You didn't kill them all. They have diversified genetic code in there, and hey, we've got soybean. Now it'll grow in crummy soil, and no bugs will eat it. That's the contemporary soybean. It's non-digestible protein. And in many cases, unless it's properly fermented, it is actually deleterious to your health. It has very refined, fine waxes in it that have a great tendency to plug up your capillary system, the finest blood vessels in your body. And another product that's done the same way, we've taken rapeseed oil, which is now transformed into canola oil that is equally toxic. Rapeseed oil, if you use it complete, it's an excellent lubricant. Some of the Hubble telescope thing floating around out there someplace, they say, has some of its lubricant is rapeseed oil, but you modify it so it doesn't kill you right away, but it is not a very healthy thing to be consuming.
How do you start such a farm? What do you do year one?
Well, that's a good question. I have a 140-acre piece of ground where a green string farm is. It is right next to General Vallejo's Casa Grande, the first fort north of San Francisco, some of the most heavily beaten down, used piece of ground in Sonoma County. And I spent the first 4 years just growing soil improvement crops and feeding it with minerals and inoculating it. And every winter growing a highly diversified soil improvement crop, one with nurse weeds in it, and ones with legumes in it, and ones with low protein grasses and high protein grasses and broadleaves, and allowing them to come to full growth and incorporating them when they've died with mature, durable organic material. You incorporate that mature, durable organic material, and it has a longer than 1 year half-life. So you start building organic matter content in the soil, and that organic matter content holds and supports water and soil life, and the soil life gets to work and starts turning the soil back to what it's like to be. When John Muir in the 1860s came to Santa Rosa and wanted to go to Petaluma, he decided that he would ride through the middle of the valley instead of taking the hill road, which was the road. And so he was a big man and he had a big horse, and he got lost in the middle of the valley because the grasses were higher than he and his horse. And he didn't really get lost, but he got disoriented a little bit. And it's one of his stories. And that ground was then purchased and developed into the Ronert Seed Company. And the Ronert Seed Company, up and through the late 50s, was a major seed producer, a flower and vegetable seed producer, because the soil was so filled with organic matter, the roots and the stems and whatnot, and it was worked all for people and nothing for nature. And by the late 50s, the soil had been packed down and killed and was very hard to work, and stuff didn't grow very well anymore, and because it had diminished level of life support. And that's the same with my land, same with anything. You start and you feed nature, and it will come back. And how do you do it economically? Big question beyond the capacity of this forum.
And I think on that note, we're going to have to end. We're out of time. Will you please thank Bob Cannard?